This podcast is brought to you in part by Bradley, a full-service law firm representing clients across the country from 9 offices, including Jackson, Mississippi. Learn more at bradley.com.
Pour yourself a sweet tea, pull up a lawn chair, and turn the page with us. You're listening to Right On Mississippi, a podcast taking you inside the minds of America's most treasured wordsmiths. Hosted by Ebony Lumumba and brought to you by the Mississippi Book Festival, the South's literary lawn party. Chapter 2. Jon Meacham and Julia Reed. Greetings! I'm Ebony Lumumba. No one cares about that because I'm sitting across from 2 literary giants and all-out hilarious people. Jon Meacham, welcome.
Thank you, ma'am.
And Julia Reed.
Thank you very much.
She did not bring sangria with vodka. I've since forgiven her for that.
It's actually on the way.
It might be on the way.
Uber picked it up.
Uber drinks.
It's on its way over.
That's a dangerous motto. Well, we're just having a conversation about books, about you, which you guys know a lot about books and you know a lot about you. So it's going to be like no other interview you've ever done before because we don't really care about the stuff that people usually ask you. What's your writing process? What's your inspiration?
Yeah.
You don't care about that?
Start typing.
Yeah, fear is my inspiration. Fear, editors
all
might
out
kill me.
Well,
terror.
that's true. I've been Julia's editor more or less for 20 years,
Right.
paid and unpaid, mostly the latter.
Hey.
And to say that Julia has an ambivalent relationship with deadlines is to like saying, was Ford's Theater a good outing for the Lincolns?
Woman after my own heart. Deadline.
Fear is a good motivator. And
Just all out terror.
yeah, terror and you know and the knowledge that you won't get paid if you don't do this.
T.S. Eliot once said, a late essay, that there was a certain kind of genius that only performed on deadline. It was rather self-serving because he was late with the piece.
But it's really true. When I am sort of writing and I know I have all the time in the world, it's not as sharp or focused, or when I just sort of like sit down and spew, it's actually much better.
Well, listen, I wish I could say the same for my students, but they kind of have the same model. We'll just wait until
But there is something about
minute.
procrastination, and John knows that I'm the number one procrastinator, but I think you would agree that while you're freaking out about the fact that you have to write this and just making yourself generally miserable and coming up with all kind of other stuff to do besides that, I mean, like there's, everybody's like, my closet's clean because I had a deadline, whatever. But something weird is going on in your subconscious. It does. And so when you finally have to, like, there's no time left and you start writing, it's been bubbling around in there somewhere.
The
or at
pressure.
least I just tell myself that.
Pressure, creating diamonds, something like that, right?
I've been reading, for various reasons, a lot of E.B. White this week. And
Yeah.
White had a great line about he didn't know what he was going to say until he said it. So he said,
Even as a novelist?
we didn't as an essayist.
Essayist, yeah.
He said the only way to have contiguous thoughts is to write them down, and I find that to be true. I
do
often
too.
don't know what a conclusion will be
Until you
you're
hear
in something. David McCullough has a great line about when books are going well when you fall in the spell of them, and you're sort of living with the people even when you're living with other people.
Sure.
And I do think there's something to that. There's also in Julia and I have both done a good bit of this. People always want pre-obits, mainly because
Right.
Julia
What
and I
must a thing like that
Julia and
be?
I only know old people.
That's true.
And I actually resist that because I think there is something in that swoosh of the moment, as long as you can do it quickly.
Sure.
Our friend Devin Thomas used to say when he first went to write for Time magazine that his goal was to be faster than the best person and better than the fastest, which is not a
And
bad.
that's not a bad goal. But the book I've got out now, which is a collection of essays from Garden and Gun, my Garden and Gun column, and that's another editor can tell you that he
Yes.
sits by the computer waiting for that email to come. But
we call him the Maytag editor.
Shut up. The problem
Has nothing to do.
The problem with the column is that the illustrator is not as fast as the writer, right? So I have got to come up with. So the column ideas are often I'll sort of, okay, this is what I'll write the column about. And I have to write a sort of précis for the illustrator, and then he illustrates his column, and I will find what John was saying. I don't know what I'm going to write until I write it. And so about midway through, I'm like, oh my God, this bears no relation to this half-page illustration. So I'll have to go back and throw in some curlicue sentence, to tie it to the thing. But it's true, especially with an essay, I think.
We used to call that at Newsweek the hip fake.
The hip fake.
Hip fake to what the illustration's about.
Yeah.
So as to not just completely abuse the poor illustration.
Yeah, exactly.
and leave people wondering why you're doing something completely different in this illustration than what you're saying in the column.
It's very noble of you. I mean, to even
we are
consider.
noble people.
Obviously.
I'm glad you picked up on that.
I sense that first thing. Yeah. Let's talk about, we could talk all day about what you've written. And I'm curious about this process as you write these historical pieces. I mean, how can you be that spontaneous
within the historical context?
Yeah.
Well, I think part of it is if I undertake a big biography, I try to meet three tests. One is the person not as central in the current conversation as I think they should be? Secondly, do they have something to say to us now without beating that? Sure. Without contorting them into a 21st century person, and is there some archival light that can be shown? So once you immerse yourself, it's about a 5-year process to write a big one. And David Halberstam used to say that a great nonfiction book, or a big nonfiction book rather, was like an undergraduate degree. You spend a year and a half, 2 years getting up to speed. You spend your third year really putting it down, and then your last year making it as smart as possible. And if you think of it in those stages, it's possible. The other side of that, though, and I know Julia feels this way, is if you think sitting there, well, I am now writing history, and I will be wearing my smoking jacket.
It sounds very important.
It sounds very important,
yeah, sure.
But also it doesn't get any words on the page.
No.
And so you just have to start.
You can't. People always ask me that question. How do you start? Where do you start? What's your process? All that stuff that you said you weren't going to go into for good reason. Because it literally is just starting. And if you think about what you're doing, John has to think about more lofty things than me, but than I do. But if you think about anything you're doing, it's going to stymie you. You just start typing.
Over obsessing, right?
You literally start typing, and that's where fear comes in with me, because it's you don't have a choice.
And for me, it's hubris because my God. All right, so it's not as though Thomas Jefferson is an undercovered figure,
or Andrew Jackson,
or Franklin Roosevelt.
I don't know who any of these people are.
But so and I like the joke I make because people will stand up, at book talks and say, "How did you think you could have something new to say?" There have been lots of books about Thomas Jefferson. I'd say, well, like Casablanca, I was misinformed. I didn't know there were any. But I think there's a reason. My rather grand and overly facile response is there's a reason Shakespeare wrote about kings. You never have to explain why you're doing it. You may not succeed in engaging people.
Sure.
But if you're writing about a president of the United States at a particularly contentious and influential period, the importance of it is self-evident. So the predicate is established, and then the burden becomes, can you be both entertaining and illuminating?
You don't have to defend your choice of subject.
Yeah.
So we know about what you write. We do. If we are living and breathing in the free world. But I'm interested in...
I like that, though.
John.
There you go.
I like that.
Hubris aside. There you go. What are you reading?
Oh, gosh.
What's on your bedside table?
Well, Julia and I have equally bad taste.
That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
That's really going to send the ratings.
I shouldn't put it that way. That's totally wrong. I love. I have 3 annual books I read.
Jack Reacher.
Lee Child's Jack Reacher. Daniel Silva's...
You're kidding.
I hadn't even gone there.
Oh, they're great.
All right,
they're
you
fantastic.
Keep telling me. Not that I'm above it. Trust me, I just hadn't gotten around.
And Michael Connelly, who does the procedural in L.A., I just finished.
Bosch is like my boyfriend.
Bosch is fabulous.
I just wrote my last column for Garden and Gun was again was pulling it out of the hat. It was this women's issue, and I thought, okay, there are enough women in this damn magazine this time, so I think I'll write about men.
Right.
And as we know, men are not really going through one of their best moments at this in our culture.
I saw
just
that. Yeah.
acting
That's never
bad
happened
every which
before.
way. Not Mr. Meacham, of course, but pretty much everybody else
Present
on the
company
planet seems to
excluded.
be. Yeah. So I started rereading, just mainly because it was a good, like, lazy exercise, all of these John D. MacDonald mysteries. And the hero of those mysteries is a man named Travis McGee, who is every woman's dream, right? So I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to use Travis as an example of how people should behave. And now I have gone back since, I started writing that, I wrote that column in, like, June. I have now read like 32 John D. MacDonald. I've read them all before, but I've reread them. That's the benefit of reading the kind of books that John and I are talking about.
And the benefit of middle age is I can now reread P.D. James or
you go back
Trollope,
to those mysteries.
and I can't
We both
remember.
love Trollope and P.D. James.
And I can't remember
So
what
it's
happened.
literally like a new experience. You're
It is.
engaging it for the first
I
time. so to
reread-
speak.
Miranda and the Tempest.
I reread Walker Percy, at least one Walker Percy novel every year.
Moviegoer.
Moviegoer. It's not, actually, I was really lucky because, I lived in, when I read The Moviegoer before I moved to New Orleans. And then when Dean Baquette, who's now the editor-in-chief of the New York Times, was still, I think, the Washington bureau chief, and they had this thing, I don't know if they still do it, but they had on the website at the New York Times Book Review, they had 2 or 3 people talking about books, via email or whatever. And so it was Dean, it was, because he's from New Orleans, and it was me, and we got, help me out, Farrar Straus, Jonathan Galassi, who was the head of Farrar Straus, who was Walker's publisher. So we had this great we had to talk, conversation that went on for weeks about it, and it made me reread the book and have to really think about it, since I was trying to be dazzling, or at least not embarrass myself on the website.
It's always the goal.
So I have new
Thin
appreciation
line.
for the moviegoer, but I love probably the most The Last Gentleman in Love and the Ruins. And Lancelot is deeply, darkly hysterical, even though everyone's like, oh, this is a dark book. I'm like, I'm laughing out loud, crying.
Haunting, even.
But yeah, so I read Walker a lot. I reread, I've been on a Chekhov jag because, well, there's a Walker and Shelby Foote, his best friend, had collection of letters between the two of them. And they fought over everybody. Like, Walker loved Dostoevsky. Shelby's like, get out of here. Shelby was obsessed with Proust. Walker's like, I can't, not even going to try. But the only thing they agreed on was Chekhov. And they would write these letters, whole letters just going, basically answering the same question. How does he do it? How does he do it? Yeah. And so if you want a great lesson in writing, just pick up a volume of Chekhov and go to town. Don't you think?
That's a catchphrase for you. Pick up a copy of Chekhov and go to town.
Yeah.
Let's put it on a T-shirt.
And I thought you meant the Star Trek guy. The people I reread probably on a cycle of 5 years. I will try to reread Jane Austen's major stuff and Middlemarch. And I guess it sounds pretentious. I don't mean it that way. It's just I find them to be the most intelligent 19th century novels. And I would, if the desert island question, I would take all 47 novels of Trollope, whom I think is a more astute psychological novelist than Dickens by far.
Yeah, I agree.
And Trollope is great for
There's a gang of folks that would fight you about that.
I know.
Yeah, bring it on.
Granted, they don't have there's no muscle behind them.
I would take
Yeah,
Chekhov and Tolstoy, I think.
But the thing about Trollope is, for a biographer, he is wildly sympathetic to even his darkest characters.
So is Tolstoy.
Yeah, Tolstoy's blah, blah, blah.
Oh, shut up.
And the fight starts here in the library.
The first page of War and Peace is so brilliant.
Well, then
They're like
stop
about
there.
32
Then stop
characters, and
there.
you know every one of them by the end of the first page. It's
You know what?
That's
astonishing.
remarkable.
Okay,
It
well,
is.
here's my view of these Russian novels. It goes back to Peanuts.
What you guys can't see is the more interesting thing. about this
Linus
interview.
is reading all these books that Julia's pretentiously saying she
Oh,
reads.
please. Pretentious
And-
Trollope.
This is
Hello.
pre-obituary, by the way, guys. Okay.
And exactly. And Lucy says, "How do you pronounce all those names?" And Linus says, "Oh, I don't. I just bleep over them." So I just have to bleep over the Russian names.
Okay, you're lost, my friend. You're
All right.
lost.
I'll deal with this.
But I will agree with you on Lee Child.
There's some underlying meaning there. Just bleep over the Russian name. Lots of folks are doing that these days.
If only
Well,
the
there's
White
a- yeah,
if
that was
only the
gonna
White
say- yeah,
House
that's
would
like
do
the
it.
Right.
meaning of this. Thank you very much.
Just redact everything.
That's right. Where's Michael Flynn?
So listen, some of the things that you all have mentioned that you engage regularly, annually in terms of texts, it's not the easiest to go about with a sober mind. What are you drinking while you're reading these things?
He drinks Diet Coke.
I mean,
and coffee.
how are you?
I don't drink and read. I mean, I do a lot of drinking, as anybody who's read my books will know. But you can't really drink and write. If you read some late Hemingway, that's pretty evident. And you
Faulkner.
can't really drink and read.
I agree. I smoke and read. I smoke cigars. I don't drink anymore. But there's was it Scott McDonald? No, that's not quite the right name. Scott Donaldson who's a Cheever biographer. Wrote a great essay about, I think it was in the Swanee Review, about the cost of alcohol to the great American writers. And
There have been a ton of books.
Artists
written
in
about that.
general, right?
Yeah, but there's a whole subset. I mean, on my bookshelf, I don't know how this happened, but I was organizing some bookshelves the other day, and I must have like 6 or 7 books about drinking and writers. I mean, and it's a genre.
What else is there to say? There's that question.
Well, it just explored these these sad.
is it fuel? At a certain level, I
yeah.
suspect the argument would be that at one point, at the front end, it's the fuel, and at the back end, it's the obstacle.
And I was a newspaper reporter for a long time, and a news magazine reporter. And those days, I was still a child in Newsweek's Washington Bureau when I first started. And those were the days. There was a bar right across the street from Newsweek's Washington Bureau called the Class Reunion. It had black walls, black carpet, black tablecloths, and black ceiling. And
The manifestation of our soul.
and everybody was smoking and drinking like crazy in there. And but it was a reporter can do that because you got to just keep it together enough to and there was literally a phone. I mean, this is before emails, much less like cell phones, and there was literally a phone in the corner. And these guys would come sometimes phone in stories and then pour themselves into a booth where, these guys were drinking chartreuse after lunch and stuff. I remember one of the Washington Post guys, Tommy O'Toole, was like a chartreuse addict. But it was but then you sort of sleep it off and you can wake up again. That's a brutal way to live. But newspaper reporters could get away with it more than you can't sustain. I don't think long-term novel writing. Doing that.
Our friend Christopher Buckley has a great line somewhere about Bill Buckley's son. That the 2 martini lunch won the Cold War, because those guys,
That's pretty brilliant.
Well, those guys would be at lunch and they would have the 2 martinis. They say, "Yeah, let's put those Pershing missiles in Europe. Let's build that plant in
Here are the
L.A."
codes.
That they would never have done it sober. If they were on a treadmill. Which is
sort
It's
of liquid
astonishing to
courage.
think, though. In my day, which I'm just not all that much older than John, but in those when I started out, nobody went to lunch and had iced tea or a Diet Coke. Well, there wasn't Diet Coke, but almost.
yeah, everybody drank.
But it was
all day.
But no, they would come back to the office and somehow bang out some stuff. But it was astonishing. I'd go to the class reunion and half of Carter's staff would be in there. Jody Powell, his President Jimmy Carter's spokesman. My good friend and fellow Greenvillian Hotting Carter, who was the spokesman for the State Department, was in there. You'd have columnists. Everybody was in there just drinking all the time.
So there's a lesson to be learned.
Well, but I also, John's point is that the statesmen were also at the Sans Souci having their martini.
Well, and Churchill never.
Not drank.
Yeah, Churchill woke up and at breakfast he would light a cigar and would have a Johnny Walker Red, very weak, but it would have soda, and he would drink. There was never a moment of the day when there was not some alcohol in his system.
But wouldn't you say that is an extremely rare example of functioning?
Oh my God! Yeah, absolutely.
You know more about Churchill than I do, obviously, but
FDR waited till the evening, but he would have 2 drinks. It's amazing we all aren't speaking German, because his idea of a martini was 3/4 vermouth, 1/4 gin. And Churchill hated those drinks so much that he would pour them in a plant in the residence. And the plant died. The plant died over Christmas 1941.
A science experiment gone wrong, for certain. Yeah. So I'm interested in what you pull out of your own writing and research, specifically you, John. Have you found yourself sort of shifting in habits and characteristics based on folks or themes that you've written about?
You mean personally?
Mm-hmm.
I like to think so. I like to think that by exposure to people who have been transformative, that somehow or another, more of a disposition of heart and mind.
So you're not having a Johnny Walker in the morning.
No, I'm not. I'm not doing that. No. In terms of habits,
His
no.
other admirable qualities.
But what I find the longer I do this is, and it's been exactly 30 years since my first byline in a newspaper this summer, is more and more sympathy and a much more nuanced view of how people in power make decisions. By and large, I think they're trying to do the right thing. They are, if they get to the right thing 51% of the time, we get a Lincoln. But it's not much higher than that. And so maybe it's middle age, maybe it's, I don't know quite sure what it is. But I think the more time you spend in the company of people who had responsibility for other people's lives, you realize that what's truly remarkable is not that they got so much wrong, but that they got so much right.
Sure.
Yeah.
It outweighs, perhaps,
That
questionable decisions.
You have to judge them on the totality. Franklin Roosevelt saved capitalism and defeated tyranny around the world, but projected America into global power against the forces of isolationism, and yet he issued Executive Order 9066 interning the Japanese Americans, not foreign nationals, American citizens.
Exactly.
So what do you make of that? Earl Warren, who issued the Brown versus Board of Education decision, a unanimous decision, was an architect of Japanese American internment when he was the Attorney General of California. If you read Lincoln's first inaugural, he said slavery's fine where it is.
He did.
Right? So I think if we overly romanticize the past, we do a disservice in two ways. So one is we do a disservice to the sacrifice of those who were dealing with obstacles and overcame them. And Mississippi is a particularly pungent example of that. As is the American South in general. Yeah. And the other is we foreclose the possibility of learning about how democratic, lowercase d, progress happens.
So it sounds like you're a lot more forgiving of yourself and other people because of what you.
Well, certainly of other people.
Still working on stuff. Julia?
Well, I mean, my experience is so different than John. I mean, the way what we write about and stuff. When I started out as a journalist, and especially during the 20 years I spent at Vogue, I did a lot of profiles. And it was like just being given, a sort of another college education. It's like whatever I wanted to learn about, I could go do. And whoever I wanted to go meet. And all of those people all those experiences have fed now into this giant whatever washing machine that I have. But,
washing machine.
I remember assigning somebody else when I was an editor and a writer at Vogue to go spend a weekend with Jim Harrison in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, a novelist that I was like madly in love with and read everything. And a friend of mine said, "What are you doing?" So I called the woman that I had assigned and made up some lie and went myself. And Jim and I became fast friends. But that was like an occasion where that changed my life and enriched it greatly just by this friendship with this amazing writer and poet. But then I remember just people that I was just dreading going to interview, like Barbara Streisand, nightmare and a half. I mean, like the woman, I literally got in the car. That was in the days where like your magazines were so rich, as John remembers too, that you had a black car sitting around waiting for you every time. And so I got in that car and I literally got in this car and started I had to scream for like 5 minutes because it had been so stressful. But then I developed this weird sympathy for her, even though she'd like call me in the middle of the night. One morning at 1 o'clock in the morning, she goes, "Julia, it's Barbara." I'm like, I'm thinking of all the Barbaras I knew. But Barbara Streisand did not come into the brain pan yet. So she's crazy. But I remember trying to be sort of super gentle with her when I was writing her, because you do learn, whether you're writing a biography or even more so in some ways with an alive person in the here and now, who am I, buddy? And it does make you... Wow. It
judge
does.
Not. Judge not.
Yeah, and
judged.
And you still, then you learn. I had some great experiences. I went on the Trans-Siberian Railroad with a bunch of lesbians from Germany and fishermen's wives from
Who hasn't done that?
France to go
Just
to
saying.
the
Spring
UN
break.
Women's Conference. I mean, I went to Afghanistan. I mean, like all these places. I went to Romania right after the fall because the beauty editor of Vogue actually thought that the spa in Bucharest was still going to be open, even though the Ceausescus had just been burned alive. So
Preserve the spa.
I got great fodder from all those experiences and learned a lot from the people that I interviewed. So I draw on that now. It's it's not as hard as it could be when I have to produce a column on demand, say, because all that stuff is rolling around somewhere in the brain pan.
And you've still got stuff to write about that. I mean, you stopped me right at this spa that wasn't going to actually be there.
I wrote about that for Vogue. It's a pretty funny story. I might have to resurrect that sooner or later. I mean, like going to the spa, the beauty spa in Bucharest, when I landed, there was not a roof on the airport and wild dogs were roaming around. So I'm like, I'm pretty sure that the beauty spa is not.
Yeah, the mud treatment is going to be
I
particularly
kept telling
interesting.
our crazy as hell editor, Shirley Lord, who was married to Abe Rosenthal, who was then the editor-in-chief of the New York Times, so she should have known better. I'm like, Shirley, John is making a crazy
He's doing the
motion there.
crazy
Everybody's
finger
crazy.
rotation.
I'm like, Shirley, I'm pretty sure, I don't know if you've been reading the paper, like your husband's paper, the front page. I mean, like, Romania's, the government has fallen, okay? And it's like, no, the ambassador's going to meet you. You have to go.
Get a mani-pedi.
Yeah, okay, you should have seen the spa. And it turns out that the spa, the treatment there, I did find a doctor who once worked at the spa, and the treatment there was they gave you amphetamines and cortisone and lidocaine. So you're just numb and speeding. So, of course, you're like perky.
Yeah.
I was kind of sad that the spa wasn't going. I'm like, hell, I get a lot done. I mean,
I did not have that experience in
Let's
writing
bottle
about
this
the
up.
Bush family.
You're kidding.
I know it's surprising.
I know. Who'd have thunk it?
But that was the great thing about the profession when John and I first got into it, though,
That's
is because they, magazines and newspapers had extraordinary budgets. I mean, before I wrote my first profile of Bill Clinton, I followed him for 9 months, day in and day out, and that is the way you find out. Like now,
The intricacies.
we have a president who just regurgitates whatever is like the first. I mean, I don't even know if
He
you can
doesn't know
describe
what
it
he's
as a
gonna
brain
say
pan,
until
but
it comes
whatever. I
out.
mean, like it just spews out. But until that moment, you used to have to sort of spend a whole lot of time with these people to sort of get some kind of window into their real soul. And it takes, a moment on a campaign train at 1 o'clock in the morning when I watched John Edwards get in a fight with a man in a waffle suit.
Wait, a
Waffle
waffle
man.
costume?
Waffle man. Yeah, he was wearing a big styrofoam waffle because he was making the point that John Kerry was waffling on the issues, and Kerry was the Democratic nominee.
Obviously, that's why you would wear a waffle costume.
And nobody was taking the Waffle Man seriously. First of all, there were like a bunch of homeless people that the advanced people had managed to round up for this whistle stop at 1 a.m. in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. So the only person who cared about the waffle, but it was so offensive to him that he was being interrupted because his ego was so giant. And I mean, he literally leaned over the train, the Harry Truman train, and almost went head first into the track trying to grab the Waffle Man.
The
and punch him.
waffle.
Yeah.
Yep.
These are the kinds of things you need images of. I mean, your words are beautiful,
But
Julia,
you
but
sort
I
of
just,
wait for
I
those
wanna see
moments
it.
for
But
people to reveal
Julia,
themselves.
as ever, is working within the Plutarchian tradition.
Oh, please. I can't wait to hear this.
Julia thinks Plutarch is a shoe designer.
Okay.
But
Wait, he isn't?
Up for just a second.
But Plutarch said that, the great ancient biographer, that there are often moments where the smallest gesture or the most casual remark will tell you more about the history of a given era than the largest battle or the most important piece of statecraft. And that's absolutely true. Because
is.
all of this is a human drama.
Yeah.
And in his work for sure, when I was doing all those profiles, you just wait and wait and you have to wait it out. I mean, you just sort of, especially if you're doing, I mean, like he's excavating a lot of the times if he's doing dead folks, but when you're doing it with the live person, you go through the most incredibly stultifyingly boring periods in the world to wait for this one little illumination.
Yeah.
My goodness.
And you know it when it happens, and it's the happiest moment of your life.
Yep.
And your lead is done, and there
Yep.
you go, and
Yep.
off
Yep.
you are running, and 5,000 words later, you're over
You're
and out.
You're
Yeah.
back in the town car.
And back then, you're not injecting it onto Twitter immediately.
True.
Listen, you're in Mississippi. now.
My home state.
Yes, mine as well. We're homegirls.
And he's
I knew
married
that.
to a homegirl.
I sleep with one.
Oh, well, then by proxy, you're homegirl too. Tell me in just a few words what Mississippi means to you, and perhaps your work, if it informs it in any way.
Julia?
Oh, I knew you were going to point to me first. Well, Mississippi is home, for better or worse to me. And somehow, no matter what, the title of my new book is called South Toward Home. I'm actually building a house in Greenville, Mississippi, a tiny one, but nonetheless. Somebody said, you're like an old Jew going back to Israel. So, like, here I go crawling back home. Yeah. But, it's true. You go back to the motherland. Mm-hmm. And it's so, for all its complications, sordid, horrible history, a lot of which I was still alive to see.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be from anywhere else, because you talk about human drama, we are watching it, and we still are. But I had a front row seat to a lot of good stuff and a lot of bad stuff, and I wouldn't trade that. I wouldn't want to be from someplace dull, frankly. I'm really glad I'm from where I'm from, and it means.
Likewise.
It's. I used to write when I lived in Washington and New York, and you could actually fly. I would go home, and there was actually in those days a nice Delta Airlines jet from Memphis to Greenville. Mm-hmm. But even so, I would rent the biggest car I could get at Avis or Hertz and roll down the windows and bomb down that. And you go over this last hill when you leave Memphis, and you go into the flatness of that delta, and it was like, talk about Proust. There's no more powerful scent than the smell of defoliant and chemicals and dirt. And I'm like, whoa, I am home. There's just
crop
something.
Dusters above your head.
Yeah, the delta landscape is almost lunar. It's like another world, and it feels like that. And that re-entry always makes me feel great, actually, like I'm home.
Beautiful. John, anything to add?
I take it as a more general than a particular. I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, grew up on a Civil War battlefield, Missionary Ridge, which is where Arthur MacArthur won his Medal of Honor. It's how Sherman got to Georgia. Mm-hmm. I went to Sewanee, the University of the South, and one of the critical books in my formation, insofar as I've been formed, was All the King's Men. So somewhere between Louisiana and Tennessee, and I covered politics in Georgia, and of course, having married into Tribbett, Mississippi,
royalty.
Yeah, well, yeah. We'll leave that aside. It's part of a landscape where, in American history, and I say this as a clinical observation, the Southern manifestation of national factors is acute and often extreme to exaggerated. So when the North sneezes, the South catches a cold. And so I think Mississippi is very much at the heart of that.
Belly of the beast. Listen, y'all, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was actually fun.
This is a joy. Best thing I've done all day.
Thank you.
Besides that Johnny Walker this morning.
That's good. That's good. And then he started drinking Paul Roger at lunch.
Which is that is a tradition I'd like to start back up. I don't have a budget.
We'll do it
for
together.
Paul Roger.
Sisters of the South.
There you go.
Thanks, y'all, so much. This is Right On Mississippi. Right on, Julia and John.
Right on.
Thank you, Madam First Lady.
Thank you. We want to thank Jon Meacham and Julia Reed for joining us today. Be sure to visit your local bookstore to purchase their works and keep up with them online by checking out the links in the description. Right On Mississippi is brought to you by the Mississippi Book Festival and Bradley Arendt, and produced by Podastery Studios. Our guests for this episode were Jon Meacham and Julia Reed. Our editor was Joshua Heath, producer Holly Lang, executive producer Bo York, and I've been your host, Ebony Lumumba. We look forward to turning the page with you on the next chapter of Right On Mississippi.